بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الاسم فؤاد جاسم محمد، تدريسي في قسم اللغة الانكليزية، كلية التربية للعلوم الانسانية، جامعة الانبار. محاضرتي هذا اليوم هي المحاضرة الأولى لطلبة المرحلة الأولى في القسم في مادة علم الأصوات اللغوية. Good morning everyone. My name is Fouad Jaasim Muhammad. I'm a lecturer in Phonetics and Phonology in the Department of English, College of Education for Humanities, University of Untitled. Today's lecture is the first lecture in phonetics presented to students of the first year in the department. First, I would like to welcome you for being here. The title of this lecture is Introduction to Phonetics, and the focus will be on one of the basic branches of phonetics, which is articulatory phonetics. In this lecture, I will talk about phonetics as a general term and explain some of the reasons why do we need to study phonetics. Then I would talk about speech sounds and how to study them, how to analyze them. After that, I will refer to the main branches of phonetics, of course including articulatory phonetics, which is our focus in today's lecture. Later, I will go more deeply in explaining the techniques and the mechanisms used and followed in describing English consonants. And today we will talk about English consonants. And then I will talk about the IPA, which is the short term of International Phonetic Alphabet. Before we start, and since we are talking about speech sounds, and we are concerned we are specialists in analyzing those units of speech which we call sounds. It's important and essential to explain what's meant by speech. Speech is a term that refers to the processes associated with the production and perception of sounds in the world spoken languages, which is one of the concerns of those teaching English language and of course any other language. This system includes a group of activities, and it needs a precise control of airflow, which is the main media of speech generation, which includes exhalation to inhalation ratio, which is controlled by speakers or language users. It also involves control of vocal fold vibration, which is again one of those basic concepts in speech analysis. And those vibrations and the number of cycles can reach to up to 1,000 vibrations per second in each single second. It also involves timing of intricate movements of speech organs, which we will talk about later and explain them in more detail. Speech involves rapid decoding by ear of sound waves passing through the air, which is the job of acoustic phonetics, which is one of the branches of this system. Precise and rapid recreation is also involved in our brains as language users, and how speakers intend to send the message represented by a speech sound. And again, we need sometimes to have an idea about how listeners analyze the message or the sound produced. In this figure, cited from Dennis and Pinson, 1993, we can see the whole speech chain, starting from the speaker and ending the listener. It involves a very complicated system of components. We have, on the linguistic level, we have sensory nerves and motor nerves. We have brain, or before this we have the speech initiation, represented by the use of the vocal muscles, represented by the vocal cords, which is referred to as the physiological level. Then, once the sound is produced, it goes through a channel, which is the media. The air will be the channel that transmits the sound from mouths of speakers to ears of listeners. And we call this acoustic level or acoustic phonetics, which we'll talk about later. Then we have, at the physiological level, we have ears of speakers and how speech sounds signals are perceived by ears. And finally, we need to use some sensory nerves, represented by the brain, to analyze linguistically, to analyze the speech sounds and sometimes refer to their meanings. We talked about speech, of which sound is the basic component. Now, we need to define what sound means. Sound is variation of a pressure that is transmitted through physical medium, which is usually the air, without which we can't produce speech, and it is detectable by ears of other people, including speakers themselves. In air, sounds are transmitted through waves, characterized by the transmission of the energy in the form of compression and condensation, sometimes increased pressure, and sometimes we have decreased pressure, which is referred to as rarefaction. There is no sound without vibration, but not all vibrations produce sounds. What we mean by this is that for each single sound there needs to be type of initiation represented by vibration bodies, which is our concern in articulatory phonetics, which is taking place in the vocal cords, and then modified by some constructions by means of the different speech organs. A source of energy is needed to initiate that vibration. We will see that speech involves three main steps: initiation, phonation, and articulation, which is our talk today. As I said, the medium in which sounds travel is air. Sounds are the minimal units of speech. They are sometimes referred to as segments. There are two main kinds of sounds in all of the world languages. These are vowels and consonants. The more complicated way of producing consonants is because they need, and they are produced by different types of initiations. The air is obstructed in different and sometimes complicated or critical places in the oral or nasal cavity, but the number of sounds is limited to 300 segments in across the world languages. There are no more than 300 different speech sounds for all the world languages put all together. There is type of human possibility of differentiating sounds, producing them differently, and perceiving them in different ways and different techniques. Sometimes are very common, others are problematic as far as the way they are produced and the way they are perceived by listeners. One of the very common sounds are the consonants, which are mostly found in majority of the world languages. Some languages have unique number of consonants which are unique to these languages. Now, since we are talking about speech, sounds, how sounds are produced, our concern is how many branches of phonetics do we have. Phonetics is that system that studies the physiological and anatomical aspects of the human speech sounds. It includes three main branches, in addition to a fourth one, which is already mentioned. The first branch is referred to as Articulatory Phonetics, which job is to study the organs of speech, how they are used to produce the different groups of consonants and vowels. This is the production stage or phase of in the speech system. Acoustic phonetics studies the sound waves and how speech sounds are transmitted and traveling through the medium, which is air. Auditory phonetics has something to do with how sounds are decoded or perceived by ears or brains of speakers. Now, in addition to this, but before that, we can explain these or summarize these three main branches of phonetics as calling them mouth, air, and ear, to stand for articulatory, acoustic, and auditory phonetics, respectively. In addition to these three main branches of phonetics, we have what's called instrumental or experimental phonetics, which is concerned in analyzing the particular aspects of sound production and transmission and perception. Now, articulatory phonetics is one of those main components of general phonetics. It involves or has three main components or parts through which any single sound need to move. The first component is initiation, which is the supply of air to the system, and that's why speech is sometimes referred to as modified breathing, and without the initiation of air, there is no speech sound, or there's no speech at all. The second component is referred to as phonation, which is where and how the modification and how the airflow is modified at one of the basic organs of speech, which is the larynx, where we can see something called the vocal folds, and articulation, which is the use of the vocal organs to modify the air as it travels through the oral or the nasal cavity, and to shape or to give each single sound its due shape and its due characteristics as it is produced. Since we are concerned with organs of speech, we need to know, to get an idea about what organs are involved in the speech production. Mainly we have two cavities that are used to produce speech sounds. In the oral cavity we have different parts of and different organs of speech, and in the nasal cavity, while air is modified and articulated, it needs to go through one of the cavities or outlets. These are either the oral cavity or the nasal cavity. We have different organs of speech, starting from the very front part, which is the lips, and ending with the larynx. We have the alveolar ridge, the nasal, the lower rib, the tongue with its different parts, starting from the tip and ending with the root part of the tongue. And the tongue is one of the most important organs of speech, which is mostly involved in the production of the majority of speech sounds. In the roof of the oral cavity we have what's called the palate, which is divided into three main parts. At the very front region we have the alveolar ridge, which is just behind the upper teeth, and in the middle we have the hard palate, which occupies and represents most of the roof of the oral cavity or roof of the mouth, and at the very end, the very back region, we have what's called the soft palate, which is responsible for dividing sounds into either oral or nasal sounds. When it's attached to the hard palate, the air is going to pass through the oral cavity, and then we will have the oral sounds. And if it is lowered, it's going to close the oral cavity and let the air goes through the nose, which is where we can have the production of nasal sounds. Now, the way the speech sounds are classified is not a new topic. It's been used for a long time by those specialists in how sounds are produced and how can they be analyzed. One of the main sources of getting the best way to classify the English or the speech sounds in general is through the use of what's called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is that table that includes speech sounds of all the world languages. It's not concerned with language A and language B. This includes different items like identifying the articulators involved in the production of any single sound, and the production of each single sound, mainly consonants. There need to be one active and one passive articulator or organs of speech. Those organs of speech which can move either consciously by speakers themselves or unconsciously are referred to as active. Those that can't move, they are referred to as passive articulators. The prediction of consonants or speech sounds is done by the attachment of at least one active articulator, organ of speech, and one passive articulator. It has something to do with whether the airflow is going through the oral or the nasal cavity, as I'd already mentioned, where the velum or the soft palate is the main responsible part of dividing sounds into either oral or nasal sounds, and where the main movements take place, which is referred to as a place of articulation. In other words, where exactly in the oral cavity the air is obstructed, and which organs of speech are involved in this construction, and at which point it is constructed. And then there is something called manner of articulation, how air and the level of pressure involved in the construction for which a place of articulation is responsible. In other words, two organs of speech. And in addition to place and manner of articulation, we need to use a state of voicing where we can divide sounds into either voiced or voiceless, depending on whether there is vibration in the vocal cords, where we have the voiced consonants or sounds, and there might be no vibration in the vocal cords. In this case, we will have the voiceless consonants. Before we go to talk in more detail about the classification of the speech sounds and consonants in particular, we need to have an idea about two main concepts of linguistics. We had already talked and started talking about phonetics. Now, sometimes we have another branch of linguistics which is called phonology, which is a complementary to phonetics. And one of the basic questions that bears into my mind is whether phonetics precedes phonology or vice versa. Phonetics is concerned with form, which is physical or physiological aspects, actual production of sounds, while phonology is concerned with the function, which is cognitive aspects. Another point of difference is that articulatory and acoustic events are among the most important branches of phonetics, while phonology plans to encode of linguistic units and to interpret their functions or their job. Phonetics is concerned with audition and perception, but phonology is concerned with storage and the processing of linguistic units. Variation in the speaking and effects on perception is one of the jobs of phonetics, while phonology looks for describing the abstract properties of particular languages. At the same time, phonetics is concerned with all human languages. It's concerned, the focus is on speech sounds in general. This is the International Phonetic Alphabet, which includes the consonants. As we can notice, these three main criteria that we need to use when describing consonants are explained in this table. On the very top, we have place of articulation, where we have a number of points at which air is abstracted to produce the main consonants. On the left side, we have manner of articulation. As I said, this is how the air is constructed, and the third criterion is voicing, whether the consonant is voiced or voiceless, depending on whether there is vibration in the vocal cords or not. The first two, for place of articulation, we are starting from the front of the oral cavity and ending with the very back region of the oral cavity. For example, we have four regions in the oral cavity, which are bilabial, labiodental, dental, and alveolar. The sounds produced in these four regions are called dorsal, or they are called, sorry about this, they are coronal or labial and coronal, while the ones produced in a back region are called dorsal and radical. We will go through these in moments. Bilabial consonants are produced by both lips coming into contact with each other. Examples of the bilabial consonants are p, b, and m, and the only organ of speech involved in the production of bilabial consonants are both the upper and the lower lips. Labiodentals are produced with the involvement of the upper teeth coming into attach the lower lip. In this case, we have the lower lip as the passive articulator, while the active articulator is the upper teeth. Dentals are produced with the tip of the tongue coming into contact with the upper teeth, like th and the. Alveolars are produced with the involvement of the tip of the tongue coming into contact with the alveolar ridge, which is the first part of the palate, just behind the upper teeth. Now, if we go more backward in the oral cavity, we will have four regions, post-alveolar, like sh and j, retroflex, like t, d, and n, and palatal, like na, and velar, for example, k, g, and n consonants. And each of these is produced with the involvement of different parts of speech. And if you notice that in most of these sounds we have the tongue as one of the main articulators and organs of speech involved in the production of these groups of consonants. Now, this is a summary of how and when, where in the oral cavity, places of articulation of the different types of consonants. For example, for bilabial, in the introduction of bilabial consonants, we have the upper and lower lips as both active and passive articulators at the same time. For labiodentals, we have the lower lip as the active, the movable organ of speech, and the upper front teeth as the passive or unmovable organ of speech. In the dental consonants, we need to move the tongue tip to attach the upper front teeth. And to produce alveolar consonants, we need to move the tip of the tongue or blade of the tongue towards the alveolar ridge. Post-alveolar are produced with the involvement of tip or blade of the tongue to come just behind the alveolar ridge, while retroflex are produced with the tongue tip coming to contact the hard palate, which is the roof of the mouth. The same thing is for the palatal, but the active articulator in palatal is not the tip of the tongue, but the tongue front. Velars are produced by moving the tongue back towards the soft palate, while uvulars are produced with the involvement of the tongue back towards the uvula. Pharyngeal, which are rarely used and found in other languages, but they are found in languages like the Arabic. We'll have some examples. We have, for example, for uvulars, the Arabic qa, as in Iraq and qalb. Pharyngeals, we have the ha, which is one of those hard consonants produced by speakers of languages rather than Arabic. But for Arabic speakers, it's easily produced like as ha. Glottals, those sounds like ha, which are produced with the involvement of the glottis as the main organ of speech. This is the summary of the speech organs or organs of speech. We have the 9 regions, the 9 places of articulation for producing the consonants. And in region 1, we have bilabial consonants, as we talked about previously. More backward, we have the labiodental, and in region number 2. In the third region, dental and interdental consonants are produced. Alveolars are produced in region number 4. Number 5, more backward, is responsible and involved in the production of post-alveolars, retroflex, and palato-alveolar consonants. Moving backward to have the palatal in region number 6, and region number 7. In region number 7, velar consonants are produced, and in region number 8, uvulars are articulated. And in the very back part of the oral cavity, we have the pharyngeal region, which is represented by the pharynx, where pharyngeal consonants are produced. Thanks for watching. In the next lecture, we're going to cover place of articulation in more detail and take some supporting examples from different languages of the world, and we will start talking about manner of articulation as the second criterion used or adopted in the classification of consonants. There should be no more and more any question. Thanks for watching and thanks for being here.